Hey everyone, Kenny Chan here, Century 21% Go Group. Today we're going to be going into a deeper dive, so this is going to be a little bit of a longer video. We're going to be talking about a report that TD Economics released back in October, and a lot of media outlets have picked it up and they basically asked the same question that's on the screen. Are homeowners really wealthier than renters? So this was a headline from Financial Post. Wealth is no longer about rich versus poor, but homeowner versus renter. Canadians now separated along housing lines, says TD report. So the TD report is from TD Economics. It's called Digging Beneath the Surface. Is housing perpetuating a wealth divide in Canada? This is from October 2022. And the link, if you want to read the whole article yourself, is right on the screen. Okay, so let's go into some context first. So even with the recent price adjustments, price correction, whatever you want to call it, the average home price in Canada is still 80% higher than it was 10 years prior, as well as in the last 10 years, compensation for employees has only increased 47%. The report also notes that the impact of rising home prices or rising home valuations on its effect on wealth inequality is complex. So it's not just a matter of saying you own a home, you don't own a home, therefore your wealth is going to be different. But we're going to try to go into that report with a little bit more detail. So, of course, the question that most media outlets asks is housing leading to higher inequality? So is the fact of owning a home leading to a wealth difference between those who own a home and those who don't own a home? So the answer is obviously very nuanced. It's never a yes or no answer. It's always a yes and no. So let's get started with some observations that the report has come up with. And these are all observations and charts from directly that I took from the report. So the report has mentioned that wealth inequality, while still high, has narrowed slightly over time. So let's take a look at this chart that that TD Economics came up with. So let me show you how to read this. So chart 1 is a Canadian household share of national wealth by net worth percentile. Basically, that's saying the top 1% of net worth, how much of the total national wealth do they own as a household. So let's just say, for example, the top 1% of net worth households own about 15.6% of all wealth in Canada, basically household wealth in Canada. Okay, and therefore you can look at this and then look at the bottom 50%. They only own 5.4% of total Canadian household wealth in 2005. So you can obviously look at that and say, okay, well, it's pretty clear that there is a wealth inequality between the top 1% and the bottom 50%, and you can say that there's a very large difference in wealth between the top 1% and the bottom 50%. I don't have an opinion at this moment to share with you about that, but I'm going to try to go through the statistics and you can come up with your own conclusions. So that was 2005, and now you can go to 2019, right? So that's what they're saying. So the top 1% of net worth households, you would argue that between 2005 and 2019, it looks like they seem to be owning a little bit less, right? 15.6% to 13.7%. So you could argue, which is what they said here, that wealth inequality has narrowed slightly, which means the top 1% of net worth households owns less than they did back in 2005. So who's gotten the gains, right, is what we're looking at. So you can say who's actually gained percentages here. So you can look at the top 70 to 90%, the top 50 to 70%, and then the bottom 50%. It looks like they've all had some gains in household wealth between 2005 and 2019. So you can look at that and say, and draw the same conclusion, right? Wealth inequality, while high, has narrowed slightly over time. So this is an observation from TD Economics. Okay. But you may be tempted to think that the bottom percentages, like the bottom 50%, for example, of Canadians are getting wealthier, but that is not exactly true. Not everyone in the bottom percentages is the same. So let's look at the bottom percentages here. I mean, this bottom 50%, they owned 5.4% of all national wealth, increased to 6.3%. So you could argue, one would look at that and immediately think, well, the bottom 50% of households are making more money, or not making more money, but gaining wealth. But actually, what the TD report has said is that households that are actually driving inequality increase, so creating a greater divide in equality and wealth, are actually disproportionately younger Canadians, ages 25 to 34. This seems like a somewhat counterintuitive because younger Canadians aged 25 to 34 typically starting off on their careers, they probably might have debt from school or otherwise, and they're obviously not at their peak income generation levels yet. So why would they be creating inequality, right? So let's take a look at that. So let's give you a sample scenario. You probably know someone like this, someone who's a high income earner who's aged between 25 and 34, and they've received some financial aid from parents to purchase a home, especially if their parents are also homeowners. There's lots of surveys that show that if your parents are homeowners, you're likely, as a offspring child, also likely to be a homeowner as well. I recommend to search on YouTube Kenny Chan Real Estate Wealth Transfer. I have a whole other video about the massive wealth transfer between generations that's going to be occurring over the next, starting to occur now and over the next 10 years, and how that's going to affect real estate. But let's pretend, we're talking about a sample scenario of a high income earner between 25 and 34, receiving some financial aid from their parents to purchase a home. When they do purchase this home, they will be categorized as low wealth because they have high mortgage leverage, right? So they maybe just have the down payment, but they still have lots and lots of debt from mortgage. But eventually, what's going to happen is what this report has noticed over the time between, let's say, 2005 and 2019, is that their wealth eventually surpasses their peers who did not own a home as real estate prices have increased between 2005 and 2019. In other words, you might want to ask, some of the people categorized as low wealth from a purely technical perspective may not actually just be truly low wealth. They just might be there temporarily until between 2005 and 2019, when housing prices rose a lot, and therefore brings them out of that category. Now, this was a chart that was probably the most quoted or most copied chart from that TD Economics report. And so we're going to go into what this is actually saying. So this is chart 9, Canadian average net worth growth of homeowners and non-homeowners born in 1955 to 1964. So this is people born 1955 to 1964 between two separate time periods, 2005 and 2019. The left side is the actual average net worth, so basically assets minus liabilities in the thousands, right? So this would be $1.6 million of net worth once everything's been paid for, and this would be zero. And now let's compare owner to homeowner. So let's look at the owner from 2005. The owner in 2005, you can see this lighter green bar. You can see what their average net worth would have been, somewhere between 400 to 600,000. Whereas the non-homeowner in 2005, what their net worth was. And now let's compare to 2019. You can see the owner who owned a property between 2005 and 2019 saw their net worth increase quite substantially, right? We're talking about pretty much twofold, or if not more, right? Actually, probably more than twofold at this point. And even the non-owner increased by twofold at the same time. But the absolute values, the actual numerical values in the net worth is significantly larger. And a lot of people have looked at that and said, well, simply owners are X number of times more wealthy than non-owners, even though both owners and non-owners have increased their net worth over time. So let's take a look again at some of the statistics and what the numbers actually were. So the net worth of homeowners was more than 1.4 million by 2019. You can kind of see it from this chart right here. The gray, the large, darker green bar, 1.4. This was 1.2 million times more than the average non-homeowner. But back in 2005, this gap was just about $500,000. So what they're saying here is the gap between this light green and this light green bar was only about 500,000. But now the difference between the dark green bars between owners and non-owners in 2019 is significantly larger, so $1.2 million more. This is basically showing that real estate has provided a huge wealth generating advantage by real estate. This $1 million divide speaks to the difficulty of accumulating wealth outside of real estate. So it's actually tempting to think that while wealth inequality has improved, or things have gotten slightly better for low wealth Canadians, it's highly unlikely that it's occurred for you or your family if you do not own a home in this time period, right? We can see it from the chart from before. And unfortunately, it's the TD report is saying that it's unlikely to get any better. Rising interest rates will actually make it more difficult for Canadians to acquire housing unless they've already had a strong starting point of either higher income versus the peers or a wealth transfer from their parents. Now, despite the decline in pricing in 2022, housing affordability has only barely improved. If we look at 2005, the price to median income ratio was 4.8. Even with the 25% decrease in peak pricing in 2022, the ratio is still 6.7, which means it's still less affordable to buy a home now, even despite lower prices than it was in 2005 based on price to income. The report also mentions that every percentage point increase in interest rates from current levels will need to be accompanied by a roughly 10% decline in prices to keep the mortgage payments the same. In other words, even though prices have gone down, the actual mortgage payments have gone up, right? Unless there's an even greater price drop, right? Which basically says, to restore some sort of level of affordability, you would need a much more significant crash of real estate prices that are well over 25% that were said by the report to make properties more affordable for everybody. So some final words from the report. Once again, all these observations are not mine. They are from the report. Some of these things that I've interpreted as well, but basically I'm not saying anything that the report also hasn't also said directly. So rapid home price gains have limited accessibility of home ownership to either only high-income households or investors or buyers who already have properties or those who come from pre-existing family wealth. The report does actually not make predictions about the future of wealth generation. It's not saying that just because from 2005 to 2019 that people who owned homes, had a massive increases in their net worth compared to people who did not own homes. They're not saying that everybody should own homes. They're saying that this is just what they have remarked. This is what the report has noticed about net worth and the difficulty of obtaining, wealth in places other than real estate. It's not suggesting that people purchase homes and that's the only way to increase their wealth. Clearly, people who did not own homes in 2005 and 2019, they did increase their net wealth, according to the report. So that's something I really want to be clear about, even though I am in real estate and I'm a realtor. I'm not saying that looking at this report, everybody needs to buy a home. I can say that people who bought a home in 2005 versus people who didn't buy a home in 2005 had much greater increases in their wealth, their net worth, compared to people who didn't. But I can't say that moving forward, that'll be the exact same case. The report also noticed that housing has played a role in driving inequality between homeowners and non-homeowners, which we've talked about, but it also has kept inequality in check or in balance among homeowners themselves. Canadians' immigration policies and targets are critical in addressing regional and sectoral labor shortages and will also have a broader ambition as a tool for nation building. Basically, that's, in my opinion, that's when I interpret that, it's code word for saying, we're going to have more people living in Canada, which is going to drive demand for things like real estate and all the other infrastructure. Affordability is pressured by a Canadian population that settles within a small geographical footprint, despite the large landmass of Canada, right? Roughly 60% of the population resides only within a 200-kilometer radius to 5 major metropolitan areas. Everybody knows this. Anyone who lives in a metropolitan area in Ontario knows the difficulty of driving on highways and how so many cars there are at all times of the day. People just want to live in certain metropolitan areas, and that is going to drive either demand for real estate from a rental perspective or demand for real estate from a purchase perspective. If you have any questions, feel free to check out that report in full. The link was earlier here. Otherwise, you can also email me if you want to talk about real estate. My email's there, my phone number. You can also check out my other YouTube videos, Kenny Chan Real Estate. So I got to search on YouTube, and hope to see you at the next one. Bye now.